We look back with curiosity, gratitude, and compassion, and then we turn and face the future. We're like, man, look at how far I've got to get to, but look at how far I've come. Let's freaking go.
Welcome back to Lyfe by the Horns. We live in the smartest generation in human history. Every answer, every course, every podcast, every expert is only seconds away. And now artificial intelligence can write, it can design, it can strategize, it can even sound human. Knowledge has never been more accessible, yet anxiety continues to rise. Relationships continue to fracture, businesses still lose great people, leaders still burn out, families still drift apart. So here's the question. If intelligence is more available than ever, why does wisdom seem so much harder to find? Maybe leadership has never really been about knowing more. Maybe it's been about becoming someone people can trust. Today's guest has built her life's work around that idea. Christene Marie is the creator of the Knowing Framework, a leadership philosophy built in the integration of intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and artificial intelligence. But what drew her to me wasn't her work with AI, even though that's something that is so ever present right now. It was her belief that the future won't belong to the smartest leaders. It'll belong to the wisest ones and the ones that know themselves the most. The leaders who understand themselves before trying to lead everyone else. Christene, welcome to Lyfe by the Horns. How are you, my friend?
Dustin, I am so grateful to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me. And what a beautiful introduction to the conversation we're about to have. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so glad you're here. Well, Christene, before Knowing or the Knowing Agency, before international speaking, before leadership, business, all those things, who was the young woman who became fascinated with people?
Hmm. Well, gosh, that's such a good question. I really believe so much of our behaviors in adulthood tie to childhood experiences where we learn how to not just survive, but how do we really thrive in this childhood environment. And so one of the ways that I learned to thrive was actually in response to a narrative that was given me by my mom. And it was this narrative of we believe that you're going to be like Mother Teresa to our family and to the world. And so immediately I was like, all right, let me become a saint. And, it's so interesting, Dustin, so much of the time, that's how we form our core beliefs about ourselves, about others, about how we'll engage with the world, because that's what our caregivers are defining as our success. When you are this way, thus you'll achieve success and secure the care and love that warrants your survival. And it was never at all like I felt my life threatened by behaving accordingly. Yet that was what secured so much affection and love. And over the years, it only continued, especially in the environment. So we look at the environment in our childhood, but then we extend beyond the nucleus of the home to where did I really frequent? And I frequented actually my church growing up. It was every Sunday, but also I did a lot of theater and musicals with the church. I was there most, Friday all the way through Sunday. So I lived at the church on the weekends. And in that environment, there was a lot of praise and accolade given to those who would be selfless and would be serving behind the scenes and or serving out in front. And so it was a continuous focus and orientation towards what does everyone else need? How do I make them happy? So we start with our nucleus in childhood, we extend outward into those core ongoing recurring environments. And then we assess, okay, how do those patterns show up in adulthood? And I grew in a Christian conservative environment. And then I got married at 20 because that's what you do when you're a young Christian kid. You get
Yep.
married so you can have all the sex and be just saying it like it is. So I got married at 20. That's okay that I said the S word.
Absolutely.
And so I got married at 20. He was 23. And that behavior continued where I just thought he was the sun, moon, and stars. I was amazed at this. He was wonderful. I was amazed that I got to be with him. So here's the narrative, another narrative. So paying attention to the nucleus, the environment, and then also those narratives and how did those inform your behaviors and your beliefs about yourself. So one narrative was be like Mother Teresa. And then another narrative that actually was modeled for me by most of the kind of patriarchal environment was that the woman was very subservient, and I'm kind of like in awe of the man I'm with. There was this kind of like, this man is higher and the woman is lesser. So let me tend to you and care for you and kind of support you and what you're called to do in your life. And I very much so had that kind of interaction with my former husband, which was, and I gave it away, my former husband. And so much of that environment was based on what was modeled for me. And so I had just a very obsequious view towards everyone around me. Where it's, I'm the caretaker, even starting at 4 years old. Let me take care of you, manage your emotions by my behavior. So I felt actually like I was responsible for their emotional well being. So, this
Mhm.
orientation towards people, with every great shadow, there is also a great light, and vice versa. Carl Jung says that. So, with the great light that was so much effervescence and so much love for people, there was also a great shadow where it wasn't just my emotional thermostat was dictated by theirs, but I had a subconscious belief that I was responsible for their emotional thermostat. So it was very codependent. So there's the really truly the light and shadow, and I think that that's important to recognize, because to your point about the wisdom and the emphasis on people, how do we ensure that the cultivation of that great light, we are also aware of the great shadow that it will cast, so that we can kind of get ahead of that and curb behaviors that could otherwise be very damaging.
Yeah. And that's a hell of a calling at such a young age. Mother Teresa. Mine was like to play professional sports or be a doctor.
I guess that's a little bit more, well, professionals, doctors high. That's a high one. Well, what happened to those dreams? Can I ask you, Dustin, what happened to those?
Well, I mean, I think much like you stated, we are very conditioned by the environments that we're in, and I think as young children, a lot of times we're given this opportunity to be creative and explore and use our imagination. And so those things in my world were at the utmost high. Like I loved watching the Braves play. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I could be a professional baseball player, how amazing that would be. Or in my mind at the time, man, doctors make a lot of money. They save people's lives. I should do that too. And so, and then as I grew up and got older and through decision making and all of those things, what I wanted to do changed. How I viewed success started to change. What I believed I needed to do to climb that ladder that, people talk about, it was not manipulated for in some context, yes, but definitely evolved over time up until I got to a point where I was doing all of the things that everybody said would make you a successful person. And I'm like, okay, I still feel very empty. What is going on?
Man, that's what a appropriate segue for this conversation about the emptiness, because that's so true. And we see it, not just the smart people, add in any word before enough, smart enough,
Hmm.
successful enough, beautiful enough, talented enough. There's such a risk for that void that you're talking about.
Well, 100%. And I have seen highly admirable people. If you say the words "you are enough" to them, it will make them come undone,
Chills.
which is which is wild to me. So,
Wow.
so I love your story and thank you for being so vulnerable. But at some point, there was a shift. Was there a defining moment where
Mm,
you realize, like, hey, being this thermostat and being responsible for everybody else and their emotions and everything isn't
mm.
the thing? Was there a moment or was it a season that you went through, and what did that look like?
I love that question about a moment or a season, because, of course, every moment usually has a little bit of lead up to it where you look back and it constitutes a season. For me, it felt like a moment, but in hindsight, it was a season. So the moment for me was the build up to it was my husband actually moved out, and I was in therapy for the first time in my life. And my moment was, I was sitting in the backyard, and my puppy Zeus he was an Eastern German Shepherd, beautiful puppy. Oh my gosh. And he was chasing bees and like snapping to try to catch them in his mouth. Brilliant idea. I'm sure if he ever succeeded, he would have stopped.
Yes.
So he's running around, and this had become routine at this point. And so I was on a video call with my therapist when I had this moment of looking in the mirror for the first time in my life, where I had been so fixated on everybody else around me. And for the first time, I looked inward and I saw that I had been living as a non person for the majority of my life, like literally as just a phantom, where, like, if you were to reach out and grasp a phantom. I mean, it's like it's what's the right word for that? Where it's like it's vapor, you know?
Yeah.
It's there's nothing tangible. And that's how I had lived, just like this vaporistic type of being because I was not even skin and bones. I had never taken the time to know my soul and know my spirit and know my mind and know my body. Like I had been so fixated on everybody that I had never done the work to cultivate. But before you can cultivate something, you must know. And that's something actually that I'd love to dive into with you around even the definition of emotional intelligence because man, I was so void of that intelligence. I was so overly cultivated in the left hemisphere of the brain, which is really where the organization lives, the kind of the logical thinking. And I had damned emotions all the way up to this point. And so it wasn't even just that I was kind of neutral. I don't believe there really is anything neutral in the world. I think it's either light or dark or anything in between. So I wasn't
Yeah.
just this neutral non person, but I was actually I was kind of the antagonist in some ways to emotional health because I deemed emotions as weakness. So, in so doing, I was only cultivating 50% of me. And I was so under cultivating the right hemisphere of the brain. And in the right hemisphere of the brain is where creativity lives, is where vulnerability lives. It's actually the key to relationship. And so I realized in that moment that I had been living as a non person. And in response, I actually told my therapist, I was like, no wonder he left me. Who would want to be married to a non-person? So when I looked, I had such a view of judgment that was one of the things that we actually needed to curb right away. Because if we want to go inward and we want to investigate, if we want to come to know, yet we're going in with judgment, it's like all of the walls are going to go up. You know, I had this kind of concept over the last couple of years where it's every past experience and every past emotion that have remained unprocessed form into a brick. And usually on the brick is inscribed a narrative that because it forms a belief around ourselves, around the world. And so over time, we have this whole wall that it's like our inner life is back behind that wall. But if we go to the wall being like, all right, I'm going to tear you down as I come to get to know you, man, our wall is going to just firm up because we're taking the stance of everybody else who hurt us that that those experiences were formed around to begin with. So
Yeah.
I really, the first moment of awakening was that realization of looking in the mirror. And so then the steps that followed after were a whole litany, but it kind of encompassed the season, I suppose, of my husband moving out and saying he didn't want to be married anymore and me starting therapy for the first time, which was a huge unlock, and even as I say that, Dustin, I actually read a book, Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, and that was the book I would take my questions as I was going through the book to therapy and say, "I wanna talk about this. Like, what does this mean? Emotions are good? Like, what the heck?" So I kind of, I guess, self-led my own therapy, but it was so helpful because I had always viewed myself as somebody that I need to come in and be kinda in support role for people. So the fact I was paying someone was kind of the first step to help me unveil myself without feeling guilty.
Yeah. There's so much there, and I wish I had a whiteboard in front of me to write down all my mental thoughts as you were talking. But from what I can remember, I want to mention a couple of things that I think are important. So you mentioned this brick by brick metaphorical wall. And I think
Mm,
it's super important for people to also understand that that's not an illusion. It's not a thing that's out there. It is
yeah,
something that is in here in your nervous system. Your body remembers. And that's why those triggers and those things that happen in our life and we react instantly and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. And it's because it reminds us of those previous experiences and things that we went through. And it's that, our body trying to keep us safe for lack of a better
yes.
term. The the other thing that you mentioned that I am curious about because I have my own journey. You mentioned judgment. And when you talk about judgment, was it more so judgment that was cast towards other people, or were you struggling with judgment for yourself or on yourself?
What a good question. And it's such a good distinction. I will again refer to this book, Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. She wrote in that book, any way that we judge other people, we are subconsciously judging ourselves. And that gave me great pause because I knew I was a very harsh judge of me. And so she said, if we're judging other people, we're judging ourselves this way. But how we judge ourselves is also how we subconsciously judge others. So it goes both ways. That's why relationships are the greatest, some of the greatest mirrors. Like ideally, you can look in the mirror for yourself. But man, if you want to get to know who you are and how you are doing, go be in a relationship with somebody and then see what triggers you, what comes out. It's usually not the other person. Usually it's ourselves, and it's us getting activated. We can't get triggered by something that we not already have inside to begin with. Then there's nothing to trigger. So to this point about judgment, I really struggled with judging myself. And it was interesting. I just had this level of perfection because if we believe we're the emotional thermostat for other people and that we have the power over their emotions, if they're having a bad day, well, it's my fault. And then I need to go and adjust and change and be different. And there was a lot in my previous marriage that in one sense it's unique. Maybe unique to us, I don't know, but I know for me what I did wrong because I knew I was like I'm at a fork in a road, and this is even before my moment of awakening. And Dustin, I think that there's a combination that allows for awakening to happen when we are desperate enough for something to change. We have to have that desperation, and then when we're willing to know the truth. So we can be desperate and not be open, or we can be open, but it's just we don't have the drive and the motivation to really pursue it. It's kind of like sitting on our laurels, like whatever happens, versus I'm so desperate, but I don't actually want the truth. So when those two things come together, that's when, man, I think there's a lot of unlock, but coming together, and we can kind of self-induce our own desperation. I actually was listening to David Goggins. I love him. David Goggins' conversation a couple months ago, and him and Joe Rogan, and they talk about self-inducing pain for the purpose of kind of. I love Theodore Roosevelt's his speech that he gave Citizens in the Republic in 1914. There's a section in there where he talks about the man in the arena. And it's the concept of going in and your face is marred by dust and grime, but you know the taste of defeat and triumph rather than sitting on the sidelines pointing and looking. And so to go back to this conversation with Joe Rogan and Goggins, it's how do we self-induce our own arena so that we're going in and we're doing the work and we're inflicting effectively our own pain, whether it's the pain of self-realization by looking in the mirror or the pain of physical endurance of conquering the mind so that we know how to push back and push past where our mind is shutting down at 40% capacity. We still have 60%. So how can we learn to master? You talked about this and I was so grateful. Our body remembers.
Yes.
Our body remembers. And so in order for us to afford compassion, yet also sit in the driver's seat. So our body isn't the one in the driver's seat. Our emotions aren't the one in the driver's seat, even our own intellect, because sometimes the intellect actually needs to take a back seat so that the emotional intelligence can actually be, we've got the intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence. Sometimes the emotional intelligence actually needs to come in when we're having a fight with our partner. And they want TLC, not I told you so. So we need to understand our inner intelligences. I think of it as the intellectual, emotional, physical, because to your point, the body keeps the score. It's a great book by Bessel Kolk. And also spiritual intelligence. It's effectively that kind of like pathway to God of like
Yeah.
revelation. Where like, I don't know how I know that, but I know that. That's kind of how I think about spirit. And so we've got these inner intelligences. And for so much of our lives, I think across the board, religion, quote unquote, is isolated to the spirit. And that's what we do maybe Sunday, Saturday, Friday, whenever your service is. And then that's that time. And then you leave and you act like a completely different person. Or maybe you go into your 9 to 5 job and then you leave and you're a completely different person. The goal is that we're integrated and that we're bringing a holistic sense of to your point, we talked about this in the green room. It's not just awareness of what's going on in each intelligence, but it's allowing each one to kind of come to the table like board of directors. Each one has data, each intelligence does. And the goal is then that you and I are in the driver's seat and we have each one offering up the data that it has to share. And then we're aware of it. And then we are the ones that choose. So Viktor Frankl has this quote, between stimulus and response is choice. All of that happens. All of that seat at the table happens within that space and time between stimulus and response. And so, yes, being aware, but it totally informs the response we choose.
Yeah. And I love your definition or interpretation of intelligence, that it's not
Mm.
just IQ, it's many different things.
Yeah.
But we live in a world of people that are so fascinated with capturing of more information. And it's
Mm.
generally just IQ related things.
That's so
You
good.
have coached founders, executives, leaders, high performers, all of these people. What is the common pattern that you see? Do they lack knowledge, or do they lack the capacity
Hmm.
to consistently act in how they already know or what they already know?
Such a brilliant question. I was sitting yesterday, I sat with an executive team for a construction in the construction industry. And what we talked through 6 core pillars of where they need to change as an organization. And the last pillar was emotional maturity. And it was really interesting because of course it's like, who talks about that at an executive table? Like what? But it was really, really interesting, Dustin. I had I think, we talk about a desperation, a willingness to change, being open. And I think part of being open is being able to even receive the truth and hear it from somebody else, much less so you looking in the mirror. And they were so humble. There are 3 founders. And man, 3 men hearing from a woman coming in and saying, this is what I'm observing, and asking questions and drawing it out. And they were so open. And so much of it was exactly the latter of what you said. Theoretically, we know this because you can kind of it's intellectual, but it remains in our brain until it's actually put into practice. So this is where there's a really, really interesting it goes both ways. So bear with me while I I like kind of ideating on different concepts. So I'm gonna do
Yeah,
that
for
with you right
sure.
now. The intellect and the emotions, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Having both integrated is still internal. Like, you can theorize something, you can intellectualize it, you can even have the emotions processing it. That constitutes all 4 of our intelligences constitute, but for all intents and purposes, we'll just say IQ and EQ, constitute the inner being, the inner self. But the being, when it translates into doing, that is where we're trying to get to, where it's translating from our head and our heart, and we're kind of bringing into alignment where it's like, okay, both hemispheres are activated, and I'm engaging so I think of our emotions more so in the soul. So even though it's the left hemisphere, right hemisphere, it really is kind of like the right hemisphere is really that through line from the head to the heart. And so the goal is that we're actually activating both head and heart to then inform our actions. Otherwise, we're living disparate from that which we know versus that which we are. So it's head versus heart. And the goal is to bring integration. I like to think of the concept alignment. So I had this realization a couple years ago where I was like, wow, I have lived with my compass pointing east and west. I've been looking to the right and to the left. Effectively, I've been horizontally aligned my entire life, looking to everybody else to tell me who to be, how to be, hence the judgment, because I'm using their definitions of success to judge my life. Well, they're
Yes.
not me. And so what a harsh judge I become when my metrics are not my own. And so as I lived horizontally aligned, I realized, okay, if I was to come vertical, bring my head, my heart, my soul, every part of me vertical, to have my compass oriented north. And what that looks like is that I'm going inward to then be able to go upward and connect vertically with who was I actually created to be in the first place. Because now my metrics of judgment are actually completely changed. There's the light and shadow to judgment. The light of judgment is so often discernment. It allows for high standards. It allows for excellence. It allows for, I dare even say, perhaps even holiness. I think it is a holy pursuit to pursue our calling, to be the people that we were created and destined to be to begin with. And I really believe every single person has core reason for why they're here. They have something to give to the world that otherwise, without their existence, we wouldn't receive it. I really believe that intrinsically so. In order for us to be able to live accordingly, it's like, okay, let me be in vertical alignment. And from there, from my inner being, then do I engage horizontally in the doing. So, in order to be aligned, it's bringing every part of me, my beliefs, my behaviors, every inner part into alignment under the hierarchy of who do I want to be? But then who was I created to be beyond that? And then everything else flows from that aligned place.
Yeah. And if I were a betting man, I would say there's probably some people going, man, that sounds amazing. And how in the world do I get there? Because the you know, and I just had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, this idea that we all talk about being authentically ourselves. And we all then go, well, I want to be authentic, but I like him and I like her and I like what they did. And then we start, without even realizing it, emulating them, and we become parrots of
Mm,
them. And then our success metrics are based off of what they did. And then once again, we get to the top of the mountain and we start
right.
looking around. To your point, I'm being called to the left, to the right, east or west, and we
Yeah.
still aren't us.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good, and it's so easy to do that apart from honestly, I think every single one of us has to have our own individual I like to say operating system. We create
Hmm.
operating systems for our business, why not creating an operating system for ourselves? Like really truly. And so the way that I kind of think of my operating system, it's and I, right when I started my business 7 years ago, I was like, "Oh, I need to live my personal life like I do my business. What's my vision? What are my values?" And knowing it for ourselves so clearly and there's a couple of different things that I've stumbled into over the last couple of years that I'll get into, but starting with this, orienting our lives like we would our business, putting the same amount of intentionality. We do business retreats. Why not personal retreats? Like, why do we not orient our personal lives with the same kind of care like we do with our businesses? Our children like we would our employees, investing in them, asking questions, do an annual report. How are you doing? Are you proud of the life you're living? Is there anything you'd want to change? How can I support you better? What do you want to how are you feeling about being in this family? I was talking with a woman a couple weeks ago and she was talking about how her daughter is on her iPad and devices all the time and she wants her to come out of her room. And I was like, "Well, have you created an environment that draws her forth? That draws her out, that makes her want to come be with the family. Because so often these devices, I'm reaching for my phone, I don't have it, but these devices, man, they're captivating if we don't have an alternative. So what is the alternative that we're giving ourselves at the end of the day when we're done for entrepreneurs, probably like 7 to 7, when we're done our business, what's the alternative? What are we turning to? Have we intentionally crafted our bookendings of our work days so that when we wake up, we know immediately what we're going to kind of step into? And I like to think of it, actually, I got this from a mutual friend of ours, Qasim Aslam, a container of time. So it's not just a habit stack of I do this every day, but it's a container. It's these 2 hours, 3 hours that are sacred. And I will do any one of these activities that I know is life giving to me, that I know that reminds me of my purpose, that reminds me of what's true. Because otherwise, if we're far off, the further we get away from the truth of who we are, the truth of why we're here, the more those voices, man, are they tempting. And Dustin, there have been so many moments where I have felt the lure and the pull towards that. And it is only through my container of time every morning. And I call it vertical alignment. It's the principle and it's a practice. So my practice looks like 90 minutes every single morning. And I will have that's a container, right? So you can kind of do different things and I'll do different things. I'll usually go through what I have a framework for it, ALIGN, align. A is awaken. So it's actually like awakening my body and getting my body engaged because if I sit down first thing in the morning and I'm groggy and I'm not going to be of any use. So honestly, doing even just like a 10 to 15 minute, some kind of calisthenics or yoga or whatever, some kind of stretching movement is actually really helpful. It's like, okay, while my coffee is being made, I'm doing this. And then I sit down with my coffee. I've got a journal and it's sometimes a physical journal, sometimes it's digital. And I will go through my eulogy. I wrote my eulogy when I turned 30. And then I reversed engineered it. Instead of who is Christine at the end of her life, it's I am. So I wrote it in present tense, personal statements of, I am this person now to remind me this is more true than who everyone else says I should be. And I've added to my eulogy over the years because I want to maintain an alignment with that because it's so easy to get off course. There's so much vying for our attention. So my mornings have been the time that have been most important to me. I also did a 2-week sabbatical last year where I cut off all internet, all input. Because if we think about it, every single input is noise. That's informing our operating system. And so if I eliminate the inputs, then it allows for everything within me to actually process. And we know this with computers. There's a processing system and it informs the outputs. So if part of my operating system incorporates the flushing and the cleansing of the processing system, then I can ensure that new inputs that I add are done with intention. And it's just kind of like a reset, like resetting and clearing the system out so that new things can be added, because our bodies have a lymphatic system. It has a glymphatic system for our brain, and those flush toxins and waste. There's nothing that does that for the soul. There's nothing that does that for our creativity and our mind. So we need to effectively self-induce our own opportunities for that kind of cleansing. So morning routine, morning habit alignment, and then writing the eulogy, that gave me so much clarity. And then taking those personal retreats and orienting my life and getting our people involved who are aligned with that. I hosted a little birthday party for myself last year because birthdays are fun and people need more reason to celebrate and get together. So I had a
Yeah.
group of folks come in town and we all created vision boards together. And it was just 20, or I think it was 48 hours. People like flew in just to spend the weekend together, and we all did this vision boarding, and it was so good. Like, okay, where do I want to be? And then I host knowing dinners, and I hosted a couple during that weekend, and it was okay, where do you all want to be by this time next year? Where are you going to be? Who are you going to be? And that's so important that we ask that question. Taking that time and taking those steps to self-assess and self-evaluate. So I'll say this fourth one and then I'll hand it back over to you. I took everybody through yesterday, the executive team, where they did their own personal scorecard of emotional maturity. For each one of those 6 pillars, one was emotional maturity, one was mission and values, like where are you at? How would you rate yourself? What's the one thing blocking you? What's the one thing you'll change by end of year? And if we do this I would say biannual. So I like to do it in July because it's my birthday month. And then at the end of the year for New Year's, it offers a nice 6-month buffer each time. And it's just such a good assessment. Where am I? How am I living? Who am I? Am I living according to who I want to be, my own ideal? And even a higher calling than that is who I was created to be in the first place.
Yeah. And like I said a moment ago, I really wish I could jot down all my thoughts because there is so much to pull from there, Christene. And one of the things that you said a couple of times there, and definitely at the very end, who am I? Most people, in my experience, cannot answer that. And when they do answer it, it is very superficial. It is, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I own this, 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 and this. And they tell you about achievements and those things. And I just jumped off a call previous to this, and we were talking about this idea of no matter those achievements, if that's all you have, when you die, you basically die with 0 instead of living a life of impact.
Yeah.
And legacy, which we could talk about at a later time. The other thing that you said that I think is so true, intentionality. And people are very intentional about their business, but they're not intentional about their marriage, their health, their spiritual well-being, their emotional well-being. And I know you mentioned that, you carve out these 90 minutes, and I've been going through this, weird dialogue internally that, yes, we do all have the same 24 hours. However, we do not all have the same energy expenditure.
Mm.
And I'm sure you have felt this before as well, where you get in flow because it's something that is fulfilling to you and you can just crank through something. And in that same amount of time, you may be completely drained and you see one long email and you're like, I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
And so and I think that's and you mentioned habits, which I want to talk about just a little bit, but so many people are trying to almost like manipulate their way through life and habit stacking and doing more and getting the most done in a certain amount of time. And I really think time, although it is clearly defined, I think people need to lean more into energy and what drains them and what feeds them, and focus way more on the stuff that feeds us, so that energy expenditure is so much better. And so I would fair to say that you would agree with this. I love language. I think words are so important. And when you say that every morning you have this, 90-minute habit of awakening. And I would love to get this align acronym from you. And I would call that a ritual because I really believe, again, words matter. And habits, I believe, again, are these things that people start stacking. Rituals are things that are passed down and maintained for significant periods of time and mean so much more. And I think it's very ritualistic what you were doing, which to me just seems like it has more elevation and power. And I
Mm,
think it's very important what you're doing.
wow.
I I would and I love that we're getting off track. I actually love this conversation. I had no idea we were going all these places today. And for me, it fills me up because I love having this type of conversation with people. But I want to pivot back just a little bit to this idea again of intellectual intelligence. Do you believe that a lot of people leverage intellectual intelligence as a defense mechanism? More so meaning that can being the smartest person in the room quietly become a way to avoid vulnerability, curiosity, feedback, and growth?
Mm. Such a good question. And I've seen that to be true so much of the time where and it's a defense mechanism, right? And I would even say it could very well be the very thing that warranted the love and connection that you needed as a child. That could be the thing that gave you exactly what you needed. My darling and I talk about this frequently. When we reflect back on how somebody has treated us, it's like, well, how did their behavior actually serve you? Because you allowed for that. You allowed for this to take place. And so, with looking back at my life, when I see, oh, I wish relationships had been different or whatnot, well, actually, the way that they quote unquote used me fed that desire to fulfill on who I was supposed to be, Mother Teresa. So use me all you will, but then we get resentful. And then you know what I mean? It's like all of that on the back end. So I think that one of the things that I've seen a lot with the intellectuals that avoid perhaps divulging their soul, and then they resent the lack of connection that they can have with people. I think whatever we get upset by is perhaps the very thing that needs to be healed so often. The very
Percent.
thing that yeah, and even if we're getting upset by it, it can show that area for healing, and or could even be both. It shows us what we really value, really truly. And that's really important. That's part of knowing ourselves. So just
Yeah.
this is why okay, so emotional intelligence start has a few different steps in it within the definition of it. It starts with the ability and capacity to be aware, to understand, to control, to convey one's own emotions, and the ability to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and with empathy. So, any part of again, this self evaluation is so important. If we are finding that we consistently are not engaging in emotional relationships, that's okay. Well, let me first be aware. How do I even feel when I think of that person? What's the emotion I feel towards them? When I think of going into that room, what's the emotion that comes up? And then just starting to be aware. Dustin, I had to start doing that. Like, I had no connection with myself whatsoever 5 years ago. Like, completely no awareness. So the way that I just started learning how to do that was I kind of implemented a three-step process. One was and this is how I taught myself to be, because I didn't know how to be present. Because my worth was tied to what I did, the thought of not doing something and solely being was like, well, what a waste of time.
Yep.
And also it preys on the fear that I'm not going to be worthy. So, learning to be looked like 3 steps for me. And I actually told my therapist, "What are 3 to 5 steps of being?" And he was like, "That you don't get it." And I learned being through my little puppy Zeus. I learned it just simply by putting my phone down, taking him on walks, because you can't do anything other than be in those moments. And what I started noticing was like the sound of the snow underneath my boots, just the crunching. And I was like, I never really noticed that. And I noticed the rustling of the trees, and I could hear it. And so with being, talk about the ritual, and then we'll come right back here to your question. The ritualistic aspect is so beautiful and so important, because the more our senses are ignited, the more present we are in that moment. So lighting the candle. It's turning on the music. And even just this morning, I was actually at my darling's house because my AC went out. So I, I stayed in the guest room last night. And his little boy came down and he was in a meeting and I was getting aligned. And I was like, "Do you wanna come grab a book?" And I was like, "I have some music playing and you can come join me." So I was, like, wrapped up in my blanket and I had music playing and he came and read with me, and I had created an environment for him to enter into. And so the more we create environments, the more it becomes, to your point, this ritual. So being and the way I even started, like, okay, let me step my foot in and toe into this whole concept of being, because it feels terrifying to let go of everything I have placed my identity and worth in. The very first step for me was to slow down. Anytime I sense something that feels weird or feels off or something's not right, slow down, number one. So it might mean putting my phone away or just literally like, I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'll go to the bathroom and then be in the bathroom. So I'll slow down, I'll lean into that emotion. So rather than the discomfort in my stomach or tightening of the chest or, all of a sudden feeling overwhelmed, instead of trying to ignore that, like I had done my whole life and like thinking I was being weak and I just need to get over it, instead I actually leaned in and I asked why. Like, literally pretending like I was Sherlock Holmes. Why is this feeling and sensation here? Because to your point back at the beginning, our body keeps the score. Our physical body remembers. So often what we're experiencing in the present moment that we're triggered by, again, we can't be triggered unless it was there to begin with. So often it's the past calling us and saying, "Hey, is it time to heal this yet?" And maybe now's the moment when we can, by slowing down, by leaning in, by asking why and listening, maybe that's the time where we can actually tend to what that was. I had this moment, and this was so early on in, I guess, coming to know who I was and my knowing experience. I had this moment where a family member looked at me a certain way. It sounds silly, yet it was one of my caretakers, it was one of my parents. And they just looked at me the same way that they did when I was 8 years old, and immediately I felt 8 years old again. And so I did my little ritual of the being at that time. So not the ritual of vertical alignment, but this kind of ritual of like, let me escape, let me get quiet, let me get safe. So I went outside for a walk and I sat on the bench and I just journaled. Okay, why do I feel this way? And I realized I was like, wow, I feel 8 years old. So how do I feel right now? I feel 8 years old. So what age? And I realized, I was like, you know what? I feel this way. And then we also need to consider, but what is true now? Because to be aware, to your point, Dustin, we cannot stop with just being aware. We cannot
Correct.
stop there. We become aware of the emotion. We understand it by slowing down, leaning and asking why. And then we control it. And okay, part of controlling is like, okay, well, what's actually true today? What's true today is not at all what's true 20 years ago because we're completely different people. So, what's true today is that I actually haven't had my parent look at me like that in 20 years because they've changed so much and we have such a wonderful relationship and I know they love me. And so then I just preached the truth to myself. I hated. So this is where judgment is so dangerous because if I was judging that 8-year-old girl, there's no way I would
Yeah.
have been able to progress through the steps of emotional intelligence. So it was okay. Being curious is the thing that replaces judgment. I just want to say that. So it's anytime we start feeling judgment, it's like, oh, let me just ask why. Let me be curious. Why is this here? How is this for me? And so asking those questions of how or why or what does this have to tell me allows for curiosity rather than judgment. So in that process, I literally wrote it in I think I was on my phone just typing it out. And I was like, okay, I feel this way. I understand it because of this moment in the past. And now I'm going to preach myself the truth. And the truth is that I know they love me. We have the best relationship. I love them so much. I feel so safe. And I was able to actually soothe and tend to that 8-year-old little girl.
Real talk. Most marketing problems aren't marketing problems. They're business problems wearing a marketing hat. Cute, but very expensive. Maybe you're getting traffic, but it's not converting. Maybe you're converting, but your average sale is too low. Maybe things are fine, but not scaling. That's usually a system issue, not a need a new ad issue. So here's the move. Let's hop on a short call, look at your business, and see what's really holding your growth back. No pressure, no pitch, just a fit check. If we can help, we'll tell you how. If we can't, we'll tell you that too. Tap learn more and grab a time. And my favorite thing of everything that you just said and all that was being curious.
Mm.
And I think that's where so many people in adulthood don't spend enough time. It is just much as you said, what is my most recent accomplishment? It's always go, 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 go. Or in the case of habits and habit stacking, it's I do all these different things. No, that time, and you mentioned the puppy, and I love that. It's not even an analogy, but I love that visual because what is so true of a puppy? They're curious. You mentioned your dog trying to eat bees, and had they have eaten one of the
Love
bees, and
that.
they probably wouldn't do it again. But even for our own selves, and I want to take it even a step further. You said that people, it could be caretakers, anyone has treated us a certain way, and sometimes we hold resentments and animosity and all these things. But when you start to get really emotionally intelligent yourself, and I really feel like it really becomes a superpower if you really lean into empathy, which is not sympathy. And I think people get these confused. They say, "Oh, I'm super empathetic," and I'm like, "No, you're sympathetic. Like you feel bad for them. You're not willing to jump in the deep end with them and hug them and feel those emotions with them and go all the way in." And I love you mentioned that too, going all the way into the emotions, which a lot of that is curiosity. And what I love about emotional intelligence is that when you really, and I don't know, mastering it may not be the right word, but when you're really in tune with it with yourself, when you start to see how other people treat you, I actually just get way more curious. And I start to, and it was a beautiful question a friend of mine asked me one day. He said, and I won't say the relationship to this person, but they said, "Do you really think they are evil? Or do you think they're empty?" And I
Wow.
was like, And I was like, "No, I don't believe they're evil. I think they're empty." And when I leaned into this thought of emptiness, because I have felt it for years of my life, when I leaned back into that, I'm like, and that's the least fulfilling, least impactful state that I can think of. And then I felt bad for that person instead of being mad at them. And it's like, how can I steward that relationship better? Or create boundaries, which are, maybe we have tried this way too many times and it's just not a good fit. But
Okay.
I want to, while we have time, I really would love to lean into this IQ EQ
Mm.
framework or thought or progression or companionship, whatever it may be. Why do all three of those things matter so
Mm.
much?
What a good question. And do you mind before I answer that? And I want to save the question because I do want to answer that because you're the host. But can I just add one quick note to your note about curiosity?
100%.
Okay, so I was reminded of something as you were sharing because man, curiosity replaces judgment, but then the next step after being curious is to really be grateful. And gratitude has been the antidote for me. Man, it really staves off pride. It staves off ego. It breeds connection because you're feeling grateful for that person. And frankly, when you're in a conflict with somebody, it's like, you know what? Do I want you in my life? It's like that question of, is this person evil or are they empty? It's like, if I had to choose, would I want you in my life or out? I'm like, yeah, okay, I want you in my life. And so I like just let's just remind ourselves again of what's true. And so and in regards to relationship with ourselves, so much of, reversing judgment to be one of gratitude or curiosity allows for us to kind of go to those places. But to be able to kind of bridge the gap between, okay, I understand, and then now let me control it. Gratitude is kind of the gateway between those two steps. Because without gratitude, man, it's gonna still be hard not to judge it. Like it really like we can keep asking why I'm like, okay, now I know. But let me actually give a real emotion. Like curiosity is really good, but it's a little bit more so of a neutral emotion. So we actually really want to bring in a one that's lifted up. And I want to touch on something here in just a second, but it has to do. Have you read David Hawkins' Letting Go? Oh my gosh. Okay. I want to talk about that in just a second. But this whole concept of gratitude, because for the Stoic, we were just talking about the highly intellectual, the Stoic, or whoever's kind of off by themselves and acting according to the behavior that allowed for them to feel safe and secure throughout childhood, or maybe it was in reaction to maybe there was high emotions in their family and emotions literally were not physically safe. So they cultivated this relationship with their intellect that really kept them safe, like physically safe. So if you want to cultivate this other part of you, this other 50%, It's done so powered by, "Thank you so much for this for the intellect or for this part of me that kept me safe. Like, I'm so grateful. I needed you. And I'm not in that environment anymore, so I'm gonna kinda shift away and then, like, step forward in a new direction, but I'm not abandoning you, I'm taking you with me," and it's just this very foundational understanding with ourselves because internal family systems is a therapeutic framework that came forth in early on in my therapy, and that was probably one of the most impactful aspects from what I gleaned from therapy was having a framework of how to think about my inner world. And it talked about our parts. We have the protector part that is very organized and its intention is to keep us safe. And it's seeking to, anytime pain comes up or the wounded part, because the pain is effectively residing within a wounded part of us. And anytime it comes up, it's like, oh, let me keep us focused here over here. We're just going to keep that wounded part over there. And we're very organized and we're controlling. And then there's the firefighter, and the firefighter is pick up your phone anytime you feel pain. Don't feel it, like, and its job is to protect as well. So there's these parts of us that have worked really, really hard to keep us safe. And so when we can come in and say, I'm the new person taking the wheel, I'm going to keep you safe. I'm going to acknowledge that there's pain. I'm going to be grateful for the protector parts. Now they feel seen and now they feel heard. When we feel safe with other people, we hear this phrase of like, you made me feel seen. It's usually because there wasn't judgment and people were curious. They gave, this is what's interesting to your point of like empathy and compassion and empathy and sympathy. Our job being the caretakers, because we're taking the role of what our caretakers once were. Being an effective caretaker is empathy plus action, which is compassion. So it's that triad. I think of it in kind of a triad aspect of compassion, gratitude, and curiosity. Because it starts with curiosity, lends to gratitude, and then compassion can come in and allow for real change. And that's kind of the through line of emotional intelligence that progresses us from awareness to understanding to control, and then we can actually express it and take action as a result. And only on the other side of that is relationship. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of finish that thought, but the thing
No.
about letting go is just so good. He talks about emotions and kind of gives a hierarchical structure that assigns numerical value to emotions. And gratitude is a higher numerical value than, say, judgment and even curiosity. It's kind of like you're continuing and progressing up in terms of you're kind of bringing yourself out of the valley and out of that darkness, and you're bringing yourself closer to the light. And you can sense your own progression through that emotional numerical system.
This sounds very synonymous to the book Power versus Force,
I
which
haven't
I
read that
believe
yet,
is
but
the
I think
I
yes,
I believe
yeah,
it's the same author, so that
yes,
would
it
make
is.
sense. Okay.
That makes sense. I actually think he introduces that concept in Power versus Force, and then the entire book of Letting Go is all about that.
Okay.
I love that you read Power versus Force. Yes, I
Well,
have yet to read that.
and here's what's so ironic or serendipitous. When I came to this intensive where we first met, Ben Pekulski was supposed to be there. I
Yes.
only read that book because I used to, 20 years ago was just this massive avid follower of Ben, and he was a very intelligent bodybuilder. And
Mm.
he had mentioned one of his top 5 books was Power versus Force. And I'm like, oh, this sounds like a bodybuilding book. I'm totally going to read this. So I picked it up and I started reading it. I'm like, this has nothing to do with bodybuilding, but I did read it from cover to cover. And at that time, it was probably the most academic book I ever read, but it is also one that
Yes.
I will never forget.
I picked it up the other day and I haven't finished it, but I haven't even finished it. I barely began it, but I picked it up and I was like,
Yeah.
I need to read this. I love that you read that. And I was sad that Ben wasn't able to join us.
Me
I
too.
know we've heard such wonderful things about him. Man, I love that you know that framework. Y'all, that framework, people talk about frequency, and I was like, okay, what is that? It didn't make really sense to me, and people couldn't actually really describe frequency. But when I read that book, it was like, oh, you're kind of moving up, like the emotional numerical value. So courage is 200, pride is 150, guilt is 50, shame is 20. Shame is like
Yeah.
the lowest of all emotional, and I think you can't say frequencies effectively.
And 200 is neutral, and that should tell you something. And I loved, and I'll never forget, and this was 20 years ago, reading that book, and they were talking about the military more specifically, and that pride being, a very powerful emotion for sure, or state of being or whatever you want to call it, being below neutral. And I was just like, man, what a shame that that is what we are
Yeah.
leaning into, and something that is so powerful and supposed to be so good. And also with it, I think
Wow.
Mother Teresa was like 400 plus where she was at.
Yes.
So
Well, and this is the thing that's so interesting. With every great light, there is a great shadow. So, operating in that very high frequency, we have a propensity to fall really far. If someone's at pride, they actually don't fall that far. So, that's the danger. And even as you say that, I feel like convicted myself and like, ooh, gosh. Because to be honest, Dustin, I think I do. I've worked myself up and I'm able to maintain that higher level so often, and man, I have to be so aware. So awareness, right? That's the start. But I just have to, my mornings, they're sacred. They are sacred. And it starts with the night before. So I have to honor this time because I get so much lower when I'm not getting aligned. So that container of time, I know some people love evenings. So if it's evenings or mornings for you, but that is yours. People talk about the concept of self love, and I actually think it's been really distorted with cultural definitions of it or portrayal of it, which is bubble baths and like basically accept yourself as you are. Don't work out. And you're like, no, like I hate that. Again, I love David Goggins. And so, but the concept of self love, which is, do you know what does restore you? Do you know what does fill you back up? Do you honor, like truly honor, place value on yourself to the same extent that you do for anybody else? Because the reality is, the way you care for yourself ultimately is that which you give to others. So if you want to truly honor that person, then you fundamentally must honor yourself, give to yourself, fill up your cup so that you're giving them all of the excess rather than them depleting your cup. They can't fill your cup for you. And then they wonder why it's like walking on eggshells or why we're volatile or why we're reactive, not stable and not consistent. Well, because maybe you're not filling your cup. Maybe
yeah,
we're not doing our job.
well,
Isn't that the job of the human being to actually learn how to be a being?
yeah. And something that you mentioned there, which I love, is this idea of frequency.
Mm,
And more specifically, something my coach shared with me, and I was very hard headed at the time, but the saying is, your frequency is what you feel frequently.
hmm.
And so when we are stressed, full of pride, or lacking humility, and all of these things that when we're chronically below that 200 baseline,
Yeah.
and then we wonder why our relationships aren't good with ourself and everyone around us, or why business is not going well, it is because our frequency is off. And that sounds very woo woo to a lot of people, but you also feel it when you're around somebody with a good frequency. I actually remember telling Kasim when I left the intensive, I said, "Man, I've got to say something that is just on my heart." And he's like, "Yeah, I mean, what do you got?" And I said, "Look, man, I got to say I was impressed." And I said, "Not so much with like the teachings, although those were incredible. It was showing up. You greeted me. You knew my name. I had a great conversation with Reed. Other people had this same aura around them, and like just the whole frequency of the event was just unlike many things I have been to before." And he just looked at me kind of funny. He's like, "Frequency?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm like, I was like, "Big picture, you attracted this. This is all a byproduct of your frequency and what you're putting out into the world. And for that, I am so grateful." And I think it is just something that is
So good.
it's just something that is far too overlooked. And I you mentioned whether it be doing this ritual in the morning, in the afternoon, whenever that energy is better. It is just, and you know this, but such a great primer for leaning into that frequency or state of being that you want to be in.
Mm, that's so
So
good. I love the concept of radical responsibility. Really, really assuming radical responsibility over my life means that I actually can never blame anybody really ever again. And therefore, I must be responsible for how I order my days because so many of us are subconsciously blaming our partners, our kids, our
yeah,
business. There's all the excuses in the world why this is happening. And it's like, man, radical responsibility means that it's like I am choosing this. So either stop choosing it or stop complaining about it.
Yeah.
The choice is yours, but we have full choice over our response and our action thereafter. And if Viktor Frankl could write this in a German concentration camp, all right, we can do the same. Dustin, one of the things regarding AI, the integration of them, right? So we talk about the inner intelligences, the intellectual, emotional, spiritual, physical intelligences, and it is our human responsibility to cultivate these. This is our inner life. But the artificial intelligence is becoming the outer life. And so to be able to connect those pieces and allow for these intelligences to be working in concert together rather than people will literally go live as hermits and go become, these hermits in the clouds and in the hilltops. They'll leave the physical world. The goal is that we are strengthened from within to then be able to engage horizontally. And so a very large part of our horizontal world is shaping up to be accessing this new intelligence. And so knowing how to leverage it, I think, is probably one of the most important skill sets that we can cultivate. I think our internal brands, our personal brands, our internal selves are our own greatest asset. But then the way we leverage that and the execution thereof is through artificial intelligence. And I was thinking about this yesterday. It's timely that we're talking about this. I'm seeing more and more people creating content with AI avatars. It's so realistic. It is wild. And I'll say, it's tempting to do that. Yesterday I had to film myself creating an ad. And I was like, this sucks. And I was like, maybe at some point I'll use AI for I'll do branding and marketing for contractors. And so I'm like, maybe I'll do that for them at some point. But at the end of the day, I keep going back to the need for, you said the word authenticity earlier on. And I think that word, kind of the whole concept of self-love, they've been they've turned into these commodity terms by culture that have really lost the meaning and the grounding. Even that word intentionality, when you look at the Greek meaning of that word, it is literally the embodiment of heart, mind, body, soul alignment going towards a thing. Gary Keller and Jay Papasan wrote the book with one thing. And it's all about what is the lead domino in your life that if you were to knock it over, you're going to get to your goal that much faster. And the velocity of all of the dominoes lined up could very well knock over the Eiffel Tower. Literally, the math, if you got enough dominoes. And so what's the lead domino in your life? And putting the mind, body, soul, spirit, energy, and intentionality, it's like all of my faculties are aligned towards this one thing. And do we know what that one thing is? And then how do I leverage and harness along the pathway of execution, artificial intelligence and automation, RPA, all of these other aspects have been around for a very long time. It's much more mainstream. But how do I leverage my mission for the greatest good through these tools and technologies? And so the reason why I haven't employed anything with AIifying myself, and I want to say yet, because I don't want to put it myself in a black and white box if it could limit impact, because that is my goal. At the same time, I've been doing a show for the last 375 days. So the last year plus a week or two. And every single show, I get the question, is this AI? And even still, people will believe, because apparently, and I haven't seen this, but apparently AI is getting so good that it can answer questions in the comments. And it's insane. But the fact that I'm live with people, it immediately builds trust. Trust is, I had the opportunity, I spoke at an event and then also was serving as a moderator with the chief marketing officer of the #1 fastest growing healthcare company in the US. And it was just company in general, and it was a healthcare company. We were talking about trust, customer lifetime value. Trust is the key indicator of that. So if we want customer lifetime value to extend, to increase, which is ultimately what we all desire for our businesses, the cultivation of trust between you and your clients is of utmost importance. And so much of trust is built through human to human connection. So
Yes.
how do we leverage and automate that which can be done for the purpose of freeing ourselves for the connection that comes through, to your point, empathy, not sympathy, but empathy, through being truly authentic, knowing who I am. And in that process of knowing who we are, we thus allow ourselves to be known and increase that trust, which is the greatest, man, that's an exchange of equity right there.
Yeah. No, I love that. So follow-up question to that, and maybe in some context you've already answered this, but there are so many people out there that are afraid, and some maybe should be, that AI is becoming so capable that it may take their jobs and remove, the value of the human. But what do you believe is so uniquely valuable about the human that AI can't take away?
Well, I'm so glad you actually asked this question because you talked about curiosity earlier and how like dogs are so curious. Children are also really, really curious.
Yes.
And so I really actually believe that the more that we cultivate and give ourselves and afford ourselves, it's almost there's a present here. Afford ourselves the gift of time to actually allow for us to be creative. We're allowing original thought, original ideation, original conceptualization that AI can only build based off of the data it has. We have in our operating system the propensity and potential for true original creation. And this is where when every faculty is activated, every intelligence is turned online, that's when real ingenuity can come. I spoke with the former president of Jiffy Lube. He's the one that grew it to what it was. For he was there for 20 years. And what he found, I asked him, I was like, what's one thing? If I was going to do one thing in my life as an entrepreneur, what would I do? And he said, take 8 hours every week to just think about your business, not to be in it, but get creative. Creativity is the single greatest differentiator between us as human beings and these AI tools. They cannot have origin yet. Maybe they will one day, but I actually don't think, again, I don't want to limit it, but I really,
Yet.
Dustin, I don't think that it can create. So the more we are cultivating ourselves, the more leverage we have against these tools that are so, so powerful. It knows way more than we do intellectually, but it
Yes.
doesn't have a spirit, and I do not believe it has a soul.
Yes. So with that follow-up, trillion-dollar computer, I mean, a database of, almost all the information in the world. If we fast forward 10 years from now and all businesses are using this, what becomes the competitive advantage for businesses or leaders?
Mm, emotional intelligence, man. I really, really believe that. I have found this to be true with the more I'm working with executive teams. And I've worked with Amazon, their executive leadership for an event. I've worked with, near cresting the $100 million construction businesses. I've talked to a woman who's, a leader at a $3 billion corporation from all veins. And then also the mom and pop construction shops. Every single bit of leadership is predicated on the quality of the emotional maturity and emotional intelligence and health you're bringing into your team. And a company can really only grow to that level. People are putting the CEO of a company as these AI tools. Now, granted, I don't know how many people are working underneath it, but they're not trusting themselves. They trust these computers more than them. And so, how do we build trust with ourselves? I talked about this literally on the show 2 days ago. How do we rebuild trust with ourselves so that we can sit in these seats that are at the highest level and really know that we can run these organizations because we have the creativity, the ingenuity, the emotional intelligence that these tools cannot have? So that we can be the conductor, we can be the symphony guide to our teams and our people and the systems that they run. So the more we're willing to adapt and learn the systems together with the ability to adapt and learn ourselves, I think
Yeah.
that's the secret.
Yeah. And a follow-up thought to that, my coach had mentioned to me early on, he said, this is a question I ask many people, which is, what is the opposite of scarcity? And almost everyone says abundance. And he would say, no, it is safety. And why I believe that is so important is that even with all of the knowledge in the world, I agree with you. And I believe that the businesses that will elevate themselves the most will leverage AI and create conditions and an environment of psychological safety. Because when they do that, then not only ourselves, but the people around us feel more creative because they feel like they're in a safe space where they can ask questions and do things differently and express themselves. And I just think that is so important. I even loved it, Qasim's Intensive, when he had mentioned, potentially selling off his agency for, executive assistants. And then he was like, nope, I actually think that's going to be the competitive advantage later. And I remember sitting there just saying, I love this because our superpower as an agency, yeah, we're really great at what we do, but I would be stupid to think that AI can't do a better job at some point. But what we're really amazing at is that we have incredible humans
Mm, yeah.
that connect
Yes.
really well with people.
I love that point. I hired someone the other day who had previously been in HR and she's learning AI for that reason. It's like, people, go learn automation, please. I love that, Dustin. I mean, really, the way that you're leading in that regard, I think more and more businesses need to model. I really, really do. And it breeds loyalty. It breeds the retention of people. And it's interesting. I think that we need to get really clear on our missions. Is our mission to just make more money? Because there's a lot of automated ways to do that. But if our mission also includes the investment in souls and lives, then there actually might be times where it's not quote unquote the best business decision to keep this person on the team. But
Yeah.
am I willing to do a mission aligned, impact driven decision versus just a monetary fiduciary decision? And we're going to have to answer that for all of us very, very soon, if not now already.
Yeah. And I love something you said earlier about this idea of pieces and parts.
Mm,
And a lot of times when I'm making these decisions, I'll go back to the 5-year-old version of me in a cowboy hat. And I'm like, would this little guy be proud of the decision that we're making here? Because it is not all about the dollars and cents at the end of the day. It's fleeting.
yes. You mentioned dying with zero. There's a book called Die with Zero that actually is almost the antithesis of what you were saying. It's Die with Zero, but in a really good way. Like you've spent it all, you've given it all away, and it's like you're giving your wealth to family rather than waiting because the death tax is real. But it's like living an experiential life, Dustin. And man, the more we come to know ourselves, the more we can orchestrate and synthesize our life in such a way where we love it. I love my life. Like I really, really do. And I thought and hoped I would get to this point after my husband left. But I don't think I would have ever been able to love my life because you're forcing beauty from ashes. When you're sitting in the ashes, that is all you see. And are we willing to create beauty from the ashes, regardless of how grimy and dusty it is? Back to Theodore Roosevelt, akin to the arena. It's like, are we willing to get our faces marred by dust and grime to then know the taste of triumph?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well, I'm going to jump into probably my favorite section, which is our rapid fire. I've
Mm,
got a couple of questions for you, and I would just love top of mind, first thing that you can think of. Ready?
okay. Yeah.
All right. What is one leadership habit everyone should stop?
Stop not taking time for yourself.
Wonderful. What's one thing AI will never replace?
The soul.
What's one quality every trusted leader possesses?
This is an equality, but it came to mind first. It's the ability to look in their eyes and know that they're speaking the truth.
What is one lie ambitious people believe?
That doing it will make them feel satisfied.
Absolutely. And then the last one I have for you is the future belongs to leaders who
Know themselves.
love it. Well, final,
I
not
had to. There wasn't anything original. And we've been talking about that this whole time.
shameless plug. I love it. Well, Christine, last question for you, not rapid fire. If somebody's listening to this and they realize that they've spent years trying to become smarter
Mm,
and achieve more, but not necessarily really get to know themselves or become wiser,
mhm,
what's the first step towards becoming that kind of leader?
mm. I would start with taking a journal, committing to doing it every single day. Do a 61-day challenge. I'm going to start a 61-day challenge here in the next week or two. And I do these stints every 4 times a year. And it's just like, okay, here's my next challenge. One thing every single day for 61 days. Get into the practice of learning what's going on inside of you. And I think you'll be surprised. If you do that already, then I have another exercise. Write your eulogy. Write your
Uh,
eulogy.
yes, and I think the what's interesting about that exercise, write it as if you died today,
Yes,
and write it for who you truly aspire to be,
that's good. That's good.
and then
Yeah.
see what the difference is between the two.
Mm. Dustin, I'm glad you said that because I love the book, The Gap in the Gain, by Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. And while we look on the back, we look at the gain from, and have you read that book?
I have not.
The premise is that the goal is not that we stand here today and look at the gap for how far we want to get to, but rather we stand where we are today and we look back from where we started and we look at the gain. So his book is
Mm,
really about the gain of how far we've come rather than the gap of where we want to get to. However, I think the integration of the two is so powerful because we look back with curiosity, gratitude, and compassion, and then we turn and face the future. We're like, man, look at how far I've got to get to, but look at how far I've come. Let's freaking go. So you're looking at this gap with excitement.
yeah,
Curiosity changes when you're looking at the past with judgment. You cannot help but look at the future with fear.
yeah. No, I love that. Do you ever practice visualizations?
I've been starting to. I've heard more and more how powerful that is. Can you tell me about your
Yeah.
experience with it?
Well, one of them in particular really reminded me of something you just said. And it was this I did it with a group of like 10 other guys, and the whole thought was, close your eyes, take the breaths, all the
Mm,
things, and imagine you're walking on the beach and you're by yourself, and ahead of you there's a group of a couple of kids, maybe 10 or 11 years old.
yeah.
And as you're approaching the kids, most of them kind of vanish, but yet there's one still in front of you. Kid turns around and looks at you, and it's you when you were that age. What would that young man or young woman say?
Mm,
And for most people, when you talk about, this idea of the things we've already accomplished, for me, I was like, oh my God, he would be so proud of me.
wow.
And so often we live with so much shame and this idea that we should have accomplished more, when
Oh.
that little guy or that little girl would be so proud.
I love that. Honestly, what a beautiful note to kind of conclude this because you're right, Dustin. How do you feel about yourself? And can I offer one more exercise? If you find, yeah, like man, if you find that when you look at that little kid, like because to be honest, I thought you were gonna go in the direction of like, what do you feel like when you see that kid? And a lot of people I think when they see that kid is anger or resentment or like they have feelings around that kid. And so or maybe you're afraid of what that kid's gonna think about you, regardless of what kind of where you took your stance in that visualization that Dustin just gave us. My my encouragement for you, and my friend asked me to do this, and I did this 4 years ago, and I think it fundamentally changed the way I viewed myself. They had me for the 61-day challenge write one thing every single day that I loved about myself, and I wanted to vomit when they said that. I was like, "No way. I will run another marathon," and I hated that. And that practice, it really rewired my thinking, like at a programmatic level. So I would just encourage anybody who felt any kind of disdain towards themselves or that even that little kid, I would really, really encourage you. So we've got 3 exercises to choose from, journal every day, write your eulogy today and at the end of your life, and or that 61-day challenge of write one thing you really, really love and be specific. It can't be, "I love that I serve people." It's like, "I love that," I even got to the point where I was like, "I love how much I care." And that was the thing that I hated most about myself when I was married.
Mm,
So we come to heal these broken parts of us.
yeah,
Do that.
no, 100%. Well, guys, this was a long one and a doozy, but I absolutely loved it. I know we went way off the rails, but I think there's a lot of value and great things to take from this. So, big picture, knowledge has never been cheaper. Wisdom has never been more valuable. And I think there's a lot of things that fall under the veil of wisdom. It is not just
Mm.
IQ, it is a mixture of EQ and experience and pattern recognition and all of these things. But we know that knowledge can build businesses, It can build technology. It can even build wealth. But wisdom builds trust. It builds families. It builds cultures. It builds legacies. And as we talked a little bit about AI, we know it's continuing to become more intelligent. Our greatest opportunity isn't to compete with it. It's to become more deeply human, more curious, more emotionally healthy, more trustworthy. Because the leaders people remember won't be the ones who knew more. They'll be the ones who help people become their best. Christene, thank you for joining us. And everybody, thank you for tuning in to Lyfe by the Horns.
Thank you. I loved every moment of this.